Good evening, the news gang is here, and tonight the facts, the figures, and what was that about robbing Peter to give Paul? You be the judge. From Mutunga to Maraga, the two men firing from retirement. What saith the president? The 40 oaths of office and the missing 6. And a big gathering storm. On Yvonne's stake, a search for the objective truth. Gashuri punches through the new pending bill directive. Haven't we heard it before? Kaikai kicks the presidential bad manners debate from across the distant lands. The memo is back to basics with the virus. And on the angle tonight, let's go farming.
It is the duty of Parliament, when the president has violated the Constitution, to take steps and remove him.
To impeach the president.
To impeach the president. That is the only way you can have order. If this kind of act is allowed to continue, we are descending into a banana republic.
All right, comments there from Chief Justice Emeritus David Maraga, speaking on the live and active issue in the country today about those 40 judges, and we'll be coming back to that later on in the show. Wilson Mushora is helping us with sign language interpretation tonight. He's a sign language gangster, we like to say. But let's start very quickly. We have had all-day budget. Francis telling me the truly last budget for President Uhuru Kenyatta, in a sense, because the budget for next year, at a time like this next year, the president will really just be kufunganya virago, isn't that what they say?
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. This is President Uhuru Kenyatta's, would I say, final budget? Because the next budget, 2022 to 2023, will be implemented.
Will it not be his? Yes.
Yeah, will be implemented by a different president. If we were to follow strictly the constitutional timelines for the president, because it is 2 5-year terms. That second 5-year term ends next year. The election is on the 9th of August 2022, plus or minus the period for transition and handover to the next president. So if that budget will be read, or the highlights will be tabled, let's say the second week of June 2022, then it means the next president will, fully implement that budget. So this is President Uhuru Kenyatta's final budget that he will, let's say, fully implement. It's also a legacy project, legacy budget, if I may look at it that way. Every project that he has promised will find its way being squeezed in this budget. So it's also a high-pressure budget, I would say. It's also a budget for trying to complete the ongoing projects that have been seen as the legacy projects for the president, as well as, race against time to put in a few of the promises that he made. But at the same time, it's a very difficult budget to implement. Why do I say so? This is a budget that is coming after a year of economic hardship as a result of the COVID-19 situation. The employers, Federation of Kenya Employers, told us that 5 million jobs have been lost. Look at the number of businesses that have gone down or have recorded losses. Even mega companies have recorded losses. So what are we talking about in terms of revenue generated? If 5 million people have lost jobs, you're talking about losses of revenue in terms of income tax. You're also talking about income that would have been generated by the government as a result of the taxes that are paid by businesses. So if the government intends to raise 2 trillion shillings, where will the money come from? Bearing in mind that people have lost jobs, businesses are doing badly. Even on a good period before COVID, it was very difficult for KRA to realize the set tax targets, the set revenue targets. So you can now imagine how difficult it will be. So what does it mean? It means we will borrow more. Look at a budget of 3.6 trillion shillings, and almost 1 trillion shillings is a gaping hole that will be financed through what? Borrowing. We talked about debt ceiling. of 9 trillion.
It's going to go up.
Most likely, you will see a proposal in Parliament to increase it to about 12 trillion or 15 trillion shillings or thereabout. So you're borrowing more, which means a bigger debt burden. And as we said on this very show, there's nothing wrong with borrowing. I mean, most people are financing their lives and projects through borrowing. The question is, how much are you borrowing? At what rate? To do what? Those are the fundamental questions that need to be asked.
Safi. Yvonne?
Let me pick up on from where Gashuri has left in terms of legacy. I was speaking to Kwame Owino a little earlier, who mentioned that this government will have 9 trillion shillings worth of stalled projects. That is a huge amount of money. And just, a few people who will bear the burden, we don't like to say the losers. One of the areas that I think concerns me is, for young students. The Higher Education Loans Board has had a reduction in its budget allocation this year by about 1 billion shillings. And that, threatens about 90,000, applicants for this and who could go unfunded. In addition to that, by the way, remember universities have been doing badly and were even, I think, mentioned as one of those institutions that were not doing well by the IMF. And there was an interesting statement in the budget statement today where the cabinet secretary said, talked about the cost sharing that was introduced in public universities in 1991, but that still the current universities have not experienced any financial relief. In fact, they've only experienced further financial constraints. And the statement there that continues to say they will have a sit down to address the matter. Have you seen medical students complaining about their fees being doubled? So you have help going down, you have university fees going up. Also the charging excise duty on bank fees. That'll definitely increase the cost of borrowing to the SMEs. But let me just finish with the issue of legacy. I know a lot of us are talking about President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy now with this last budget. But I think all in all, it's also good to look at this, the 12th Parliament, right?
Yep.
More than any other, due to the new Constitution and the PFM Act, this Parliament has more powers to actually sort out our financial situation. They have more powers than previous parliaments did before the 2010 Constitution. That PFM Act gives MPs the power to alter the budget, to deal with the deficit, so that if there's an increase in allocation in the budget, they have to cut it from somewhere else so that the budget balances out. They are a fundamental process of the budget-making process. Treasury takes these numbers to them. They then sit down and say, no, add here, remove here. If we're going to add here, this is what we're going to do.
Though that power is limited.
Though the power is limited,
it's limited,
but they do have quite a bigger say in this budget. So even as we take a look at the legacy of the president in terms of our huge debt, our deficit, and the debt that's been racked up, I think there's also going to be a place and a note in history for the legacy of the role of Parliament with respect to our economy today. By the way, parliamentarians set the ceilings on borrowing, expenditure, the deficit. And remember, it's the Budgets and Appropriations Committee, by the way, that has the largest number of members at 33. That's more than any other, the PIC, the PAC, and it is for good reason. Let's also not forget that, Parliament has the very well-staffed, because some of the brilliant brains in the Parliamentary Budget Office that is supposed to assist with just this sort of thing, crunching the numbers and helping the parliamentarians understand the whole budget-making process. So let's also take a look at the Parliament and what they have done in many ways, how they have increased the debt ceiling. I mean, all of us remember all of those justifications that were made right from 2013 with that first syndicated loan that was taken by this administration of 600 billion. So there's quite a bit to be said.
But Yvonne, when you hear MPs speak, you wouldn't think they have any role at all in the budget. I mean, when life becomes difficult, when the taxes finally come,
they complain on Twitter like everybody else.
Like everybody else, like, oh, this government,
Can I just throw a random thought around that? The CDF is what, 2.5% of the budget? So that means when it's bigger, CDF is
bigger.
Thank you.
Yeah, but you talk about budget office in Parliament, but how often is their advice?
Listen.
We need to take this conversation to the other side.
Yes, this
Mila has
side.
been-
I was, in fact, on the same matter, I was listening to I think on Wahiga's show on Tuesday, we had two members of parliament, Kimani Ichung'wah, and I think we had John Badi, who was in the budget committee, and Ichung'wah, who was the former chair, I think, of the budget committee before. And what I took out of that conversation was they're helpless. Members of parliament almost feel helpless in terms of the decisions they can make concerning the budget, and they blame the executive for what they're facing. But Joe, I think looking at the budget today, and I was listening to some of the analysts, and they're talking about how our economy is a mess, and they're saying it's partly this year because of course of COVID-19, but they're also saying partly it's because of some mistakes that the government made between 2013 and 2017. One of those mistakes they're saying is investing in infrastructure projects that they'd expected would yield some returns in about 3 to 5 years. What am I talking about? Projects like the SGR or the geothermal power generation in Naivasha. They'd expected that there'd be some returns, but we are repaying the debt that we took for SGR. The industrial park that had been expected to generate employment in the manufacturing sector, what's happening to that? Because when people have jobs, they pay taxes, and it raises their standard of living and also the economy. That's not happening. And I think a lot of Yvonne talked about stalled projects. It's about almost 8.8 billion. Trillion
worth of stalled projects throughout.
And you're thinking that is another load. Yeah, those are unproductive assets which was supposed to have added some value into the economy. Let's talk about ongoing projects. I was reading somewhere that the estimates that they are not clearly showing that these projects may pick up. Is it 50% complete? Is it 80% complete? Is it 20% complete? When will they be completed so that it can add value to the economy? And I think something else that I was listening to about the projected growth of GDP. I think Yvonne will correct me. It's about 6.3% estimate, and about 6.1 in the middle term.
Yeah.
But then now this depends on a lot of things. Look at how revenue collection has been affected. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, businesses have been closed in the tourism sector, in the hotel industry. The lockdowns and the curfews have affected transport industry, taxis, bars and restaurants. Those were people who are paying taxes. They're not able to now. So less people are able to pay taxes. Another lockdown, if it comes, and that's why we keep saying people need to be careful about COVID-19. We've been told lockdowns will come again, about 10, 12 weeks. We don't want to go back there. But if that happens now, what happens to the country? For the economy to grow, it depends on a stable economic environment. It depends on a stable political environment. We're expecting maybe to have a referendum. We're expecting maybe to have elections. I was listening to John Badi saying they've not set any money aside for the referendum because it's uncertain. Yep. You need to assume that there's local consumption of goods and services. Are people able to buy? Are we able to export our goods? So all those factors need to be looked at when you're talking about whether the economy is going to grow or not. And I think those are very difficult conversations we're having as a country, looking at how things are going.
Look, the context of this budget is really one of the biggest stories, and that is this budget comes right in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, where the country, especially the business community, and when you talk of, say, the tourism industry, the entertainment industry, basically lost a whole year. And we are talking of unemployment rates that have gone high as a result of the COVID-19 related shutdowns. And so a lot of Kenyans were looking at this budget in terms of the aid towards recovery. And Francis, you pointed out correctly about the legacy aspects of it. And the legacy aspects of it, we have seen that weighing in President Uhuru Kenyatta's big four projects still getting funding. And I saw there was some 13 billion shillings for the free housing or affordable housing for Kenyans. And you will notice that there will still be an attempt to finish some of these projects before the president bows out of office next year. So quite a mix of a budget. But the optics also did not escape the notice of most of us. You saw the Passat making a return to Parliament buildings. I don't know what this ritual is about. I know way back in 2009, Finance Minister at the time, Uhuru Kenyatta, now President,
Austerity measures.
Carried out these austerity measures that are supposed to reduce and cut the cost of government. And one of the target areas was fuel guzzlers. But just so that history can be recorded correctly, the first person to actually try that was Finance Minister Simeon Nyachae. And then Uhuru actualized it in 2009. And so we have had this tradition of seeing the Passat making its way from
National
Treasury to Parliament. But beyond the symbolism, how much of that cost cutting is actually in operation? What are cabinet secretaries moving with? Are they, as the finance minister at the time, Uhuru Kenyatta, recommended, are they using facilities or cars that are less than 1,800 cc's, the Passats? Or are these Passats specially reserved for budget day? And so you just show the public that you can do this, but in reality, the guzzlers are still on the road. So they still, and this is one consistent story that has always been there in year out, the gaps between what we say in the budget and what we actually do in actual real life.
Oh, and just to add on to that, sorry, about the Passats, apparently all the CSs use the Passat only on budget day.
Yeah. But you see, also put it this way, when you walk around the country, it would give you the impression that it's like one huge construction site. Very many things are happening. Roads are being constructed, stadia, hospitals and everything else. So there's one part of it that deserves credit, that quite a number of projects are going on. Roads, many things are happening.
And it has to be admitted, obviously, that when you're talking about infrastructure projects, some of them, I mean, the dividends that come out of them come long term. So the idea seems to be that open up the country. I mean, there are places which have truly opened up. If you think about, for example, the northern part of the country, if you think about roads that go towards Marsabit and Moyale, then you talk about the one that is now being done that goes to Lodwar and I think is supposed
to go
the
Marwa one. From
so there is there's been quite something going on there with
which one is the Marwa one?
The one that goes, it's like an expansion of a Thika superhighway up to Nyeri County.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's another one that is also.
There's a lot of construction. I think once you
Mau Mau Road,
Keno going towards Makuyu and all of that, it's a whole construction going on there. I think there is something there. I mean, one also has to talk about the sort of intentions we've seen in the health sector, for example. I mean, people have talked about the money allocated, I think 14 billion or something for COVID-19 for the purchase of vaccines. The fact that the government is trying to get that directly from manufacturers, I think that's a good direction. One might argue whether that is enough or not. I mean, considering that vaccines, as we know, are helping countries around the world to kind of resume a certain degree of normalcy. A colleague, Pamela, pointed out to me that there's, I think, 5.8 billion allocated for ARVs. That is the first time that that's kind of showing up in the budget, which is a good thing. I think that the idea of investing more in health is something that we have to keep talking about every time there is a budget like this, because we have seen from the experience of COVID-19 that if you don't have health, you basically don't have anything. I mean, we've seen a health crisis around the world snowballing into a huge economic crisis because people couldn't go to work, because people were sick, because some people had died, and all kinds of things that basically snowball out of a health crisis. So I think that it behoves the government from this budget and the next and all of that to make sure that allocations to health truly reflect how important health is. And I really want us to move on.
I want to mention some positives.
I just wanted to point something very small that I needed to conclude with. You see, I talked about our country now looks like one huge construction site. Many projects are ongoing, which is a great thing. I mean, let people see the value for money in these mega projects. Let these mega projects open up the country. But at the same time, I hope they will be completed in good time and at the right cost. Because we must address two fundamental issues, away from the numbers. The question of prudent management of these resources, and the cost of running government. You see, a huge chunk of the budget that we're talking about today will go to recurrent expenditure.
Yeah.
You know, day-to-day running of government. So what is the cost of running government? The national government and the county governments. How much of the devolved resources go to development projects as opposed to how much money goes to recurrent expenditure? We need to work as a country towards that balance. And lastly, being very frugal, being very efficient. Otherwise, a lot of wastage is synonymous with the last 10 or so budgets, where you hear the former Auditor General telling us that a third of the budget every year cannot be accounted for. Yeah. If you're talking about 3.6 trillion shillings, you're saying 1.2 trillion shillings will not be accounted for? That's dangerous.
Yeah,
can we listen to Duale just before we actually continue, because he had some comments to make on the debt levels.
As we speak today, the debt level is 10 trillion. And I'm not saying it for the sake of it. As of June 2021, the debt level was 8.6. And then you add, government has made commitment and paid commitment fee on 1.3 trillion extra loans, which they have not been disbursed. So if you add 8.6 plus and 1.3, that gives you 10 trillion. Look at the amount that will be put in the Consolidated Service Fund, 1.3 trillion. That's basically saying we'll use 1.3 trillion for debt repayment and pension.
The politics of budget. I think after the manifesto, the second most political document is the budget. And I would say this because if you look today at what Aden Duale, former majority leader, had to say.
The longest serving so far.
Yes. Would he have said the same things had he been leader of majority?
A good question, and I emphasize the longest serving so far because for the entire period, because remember this administration came to power when the debt was what, 1.8? Yes. And here we are now. I mean, let's talk about 8 trillion or something of that sort. I mean, Duale says it is 10, but whatever it is, I mean, we are basically talking about nearly 7 trillion since the Jubilee administration took over, and more than half of that period, I think 3/4 of that period, Aden Duale was actually majority leader and was basically
the driver of government
business in Parliament, in the National Assembly specifically. So it does show you that, as we always say, it is a question of where you stand being determined by where you sit.
That's right.
Shall we take a break?
Yeah, I just wanted to raise some interesting things. Picking up from the debt issue, and Kwame Owino raised it on the show earlier today, saying that there might be some, progress in that respect. Talking about the IMF facility that we are getting into or already into, that gives us a 5 years grace period, and then gives us a 30-year repayment period plan. That these are the types of debts that we need to be going into. Debt that is more patient, that allows us more time and more breathing space, rather than the commercial debt that we've taken that is at a high interest rate and with a very short repayment plan. And so perhaps this is the start towards some different thinking with respect to that. Also, we need to commend the Treasury. For the first time, they met all constitutional deadlines with respect to preparation of the budget. They had the estimates, the finance bill all ready and presented to Parliament by the 30th of April. Some interesting things to note that I think will be good. There's 0 rating on materials that are used to make reusable sanitary towels. So that is a good thing, encouraging that manufacturing locally. There's also a VAT exemption on health products and technologies to boost health products. And here's another one, I guess perhaps to spur employment. There's a tax rebate to employers who engage TVET graduates as apprentices. And so that's a good thing to perhaps get more people. We know one of the biggest things they talk about is getting internship, attachment, and maybe subsequent employment as well. There's also a spur to sort of local manufacture and assembly. locally. So I know there's been a complaint about the duty that's been imposed on Bodabodas, but just to be clear, it is being imposed on those that are imported.
An assembled motorcycle.
Yes, but then, you know, sort of giving relief to those who are assembling or manufacturing those locally to sort of boost the local industry, which usually in turn leads to more jobs. So there's been, you know, some good things, some things that are interesting, including VAT exemption on equipment for generating solar and wind energy, perhaps to remove that reliance on electricity, which, you know, we all know the situation.
As they take the break, Joe, encouraging local manufacturing is also a 35% increase in imported furniture products. Importers of leathers and footwear products have to pay 25% import duty, that is to protect the local industry. There's also an excise duty now on the purchase of bulk internet data services, as well as, Yvonne, if you like locally manufactured sugar, confectionery and white chocolate, it's going to attract excise duties. I think also now betting industry also is going to attract a 20% excise duty. So I think the government is trying to rake in about 210 billion shillings.
AFC Leopards already.
So this whole is to try and get in about 210 billion, Joe. That's what this is all about. So take a break.
Okay. Well played.
Let the break be taken.
Well played.